And they'll say, well, oh, but here's this, academic who's presented this particular version of the ontological argument, the moral argument. And it's, you've got Ray Comfort, the banana man, on one hand, and they pretend that there's something superior with regard to argumentation on the other. And at the many years I've been hosting the show and doing debates, what I find is what gets labeled as sophisticated theology is the exact same thing. It's not like the arguments of these sophisticated theologians are any more sound than the arguments of Ray Comfort. It's just that they're better speakers.
They're actually less sound in one way, in that they don't. So the belief system is still anchored to a belief in revelation. They're still fixated on the texts, but they have ignored much of what seems untenable in the texts, and they don't have an argument about why that's okay. Because if God wrote any of these books, and nowhere in the book does God say, well, you could ignore the first half because now I'm getting to the good part. It's all God's word. So it's actually a less principled position than fundamentalism. And that's why it's always, in my view, unstable in the face of fundamentalism, because the fundamentalist is always on the side of, or always has the advantage of saying, listen, I'm going to read the whole book, I'm going to take the most plausible interpretation of it, I'm going to read every word as literally as possible, and that always begins to fixate on more divisive, more doctrinaire, more irrational ideas.
At least with a fundamentalist, you know what you're arguing against.
Yeah.
You're not arguing against a wet sponge.
No, it seems perverse to say it, but there's actually more integrity to the most fundamentalist position, because there's simply one irrational move, which is the belief that this book is perfect in every word. But the moment you believe that, well, then it is in fact rational to try to connect all the dots as reasonably as possible.
But sometimes they really don't say anything. They say something like, well, God is the ground of all being.
Right.
Or God is the essence of isness, or something.
Well, I have a soft spot for that kind of
Yes.
I don't like the God, the theistic version of it, but and this is perhaps the only argument I can adduce in favor of so-called sophisticated theology, which is there's an experience that people have, Christian contemplatives, say, or really contemplatives in any tradition, and have had for millennia, which does provoke those sorts of noises from people. I mean, the problem is you get far enough into any of these contemplative traditions, and everyone begins to sound like a Buddhist, and then if you're in the 14th century in Christendom, the Inquisition shows up at your door, as they did to Meister Eckhart, who happily died of natural causes just in time. But there's an experience that people have of losing their sense of self, say, and feeling at one with the universe or the world, or having some kind of ethical, just a full ethical reboot of their hard drive where they feel love that they didn't know was possible, right? A kind of self-transcending love.
Yeah, I'd enjoy that, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, so...
I'm not sure I would.
We can help.
And I'm not sure that it's a good... What is it that's a good thing about losing one's sense of self?
Well, that's a big question. Well, when you look at just the mechanics of your own suffering, when you look at just what self-concern gets you psychologically, you can begin to feel that most of your suffering is not directly tied to bad things happening. It's tied to this whole just machinery of self-concern, the anxiety about the future and regret about the past and worries about what people said of you or think of you or will think of you, and there's so much of our neurosis is taking place just in the conversation we're having with ourselves, and that's all predicated on the legitimacy of this starting point of feeling like there's a self riding around in the head who is carried through from one moment to the next in life. That you are the same person you were yesterday. So the thing that embarrassed you yesterday that you're now remembering and now feels terrible, that it's the psychological continuity there and the durable continuity that seems to mandate that you suffer over precisely the thing that you were suffering over yesterday, because you are that same self carried through moment to moment. And
just have everybody watch Frozen and you can just let it go.
Right, well, yes.
Because I think the sense of self is actually something that's incredibly valuable, that, we have a preservation motivation, we have a desire to understand the world that we inhabit. That is, it may even be the case, as I've argued and others have, that there's no such thing as altruism in a true sense, but that you could have altruism from a purely selfish standpoint and still do good.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it, that begins to play with the boundaries of the, quote, self. So if, the moment you begin to feel that your selfishness extends to everyone being happy, right, because you actually care about everyone, right, and you feel better when you see people smiling rather than, weeping. If you extend the circle of your self-concern to everyone, well then, that's not normal selfishness. That's sainthood in a.
If I'm doing it because I feel good when people smile, that doesn't mean I necessarily care about them. It means I might care about that good feeling that I get.
Well, yeah, except it's the I get part is vulnerable to inspection. The sense that there's an I who's appropriating that in every moment it's a project which can be accomplished in a moment, or you can fail to accomplish it after many years of looking. But there's the sense that there is it's useful to define what we mean by self, because most people don't feel identical to their bodies. So when I say the self doesn't exist, I'm not saying that people don't exist. I'm not saying that nobody's here and this is all an illusion. But there are contemplative and religious and spiritual traditions that can sound like they're saying something very much like that. But I'm saying that the sense that we all have of being a subject in the head, riding around in the body as though it were a kind of vehicle, right? Because this really is most people's starting point. They don't feel truly coterminous with their bodies. They feel like they're in their head and that their hands are down there in some sense. And that sense of being a subject in the head is vulnerable to inspection. You can lose that sense. And on one level, you can just be identified with your body. That is actually progress in this, on this course of self examination, because simply to feel like a body in the world is different from the way most people feel. Most people are kind of, and this is what we're running into. Most people are common sense dualists. They feel like the mind can't possibly be identical to the brain. The mind is something altogether different, and it just feels like it's in the head as there's a sort of locus of attention that's emanating from the head. But this body is a machine that can malfunction, and it's changing over time. It's clearly not what I am, and I am probably a soul then. I'm probably spirit. I can probably drift off the brain at death, and that sense is, I think, and all the ways in which that sense can be played with by fasting or prayer or meditation or psychedelics or getting crazy ideas that you find emotionally very animating. The sort of adventures you can have in dualism are part of the problem here, because
Adventures in Dualism should be the title of your next book.
Right. Yeah.